This is a workshop on grant writing. What I'll do is talk, I think maybe formally, about the process of writing a grant, some tricks to writing grants, how to think about approaching grant writing, those sorts of things. I'm happy to treat this very informally, so if you have questions as we're going through, please feel free to ask them, or we'll also have some time at the end. So let me give you a little sense of what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk a little bit about preparing to write a proposal. Some things you should do, some types of homework you should do before you actually write a proposal. We'll talk about proposal writing itself. Again, how to approach a proposal, what's different about a proposal writing versus writing a manuscript. We'll talk a little bit about budget and supplementary materials, and then I'll wrap up with kind of the submission process. I just want to point out that we brought a whole bunch of information from our office, and it's over on the side bench there, along with some Halloween goodies that we put out for you guys. I would especially encourage you, a couple of things. Do we have the PSC here? Do we have the PSC? Okay. So there's information about the upcoming CUNY PSC program, which is a small grant program, but it's a great way to get started. Also, over in the corner there are some OER bookmarks, which give both our Facebook page and our Twitter account, and we use both of those social media venues to distribute information about newly announced grant calls for proposals. Okay? So, preparing to write a proposal. Number one, do your homework. Okay? What does this mean? About 60% of submissions are rejected on the are rejected either out of hand or on the first reading because the proposals don't match the program to which they're applying, or because the applicant did not follow directions. And this is straight from the NSF Grant Seekers Toolkit, right? So 60% of proposals either haven't thought about the program they're applying to or didn't follow directions. We'll talk about following directions a little bit later. So what do you want to do? You want to make sure, in preparing to write a proposal, you want to make sure your objectives match the program's objectives. So spend a lot of time looking at programs. That's what our office here is for. In the back is Susie Mendez, Director of Sponsored Programs in our office. We have tools to help you look for grant programs. I'm happy to help. Susie can help. Dan Stageman, Director of Research in the back. Make an appointment with any of us to chat about how to look at programs. But what you really want to do is find a program that matches what you intend to do, okay? If you're a little bit, if you think it's a pretty close match, but not quite, you're starting one notch below everyone else, right? So what you really want to do is spend time early on finding the right programs to apply to. I have one of my personal embarrassing stories is I like to say I submitted about 13 grant proposals in my first 2 years, and I got at least 14 rejections. A couple of places rejected me even though I didn't even apply to them. Part of the reason was that I was not well matching the program objectives early on. Number two, after you've found a program that you think is a close fit, further align your project goals with the program goals. And let's talk about this a little bit more. What does this mean? Well, read the grant opportunity taking cues from what you read, and then try to figure out how you might not change, but tailor what you want to do to make it match the program a little bit better. So, for example, I'll show a couple of examples. This is a little excerpt from the homepage of the Law and Social Sciences program at the National Science Foundation. It gives you clues to what they're looking for. A couple of things I pulled out of here are, one of the things they say is that the program is inherently multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and multi-methodological. So this suggests to me that they're really looking for projects that are interdisciplinary in nature, have multiple methods involved. So this is what you should be thinking as you're approaching this program. Understanding of the connections between law or legal processes and human behavior. If your proposal just focuses on human behavior or just focuses on law and legal processes, probably not appropriate to this program, right? So read this carefully, really looking at what they're trying to say in the program announcement. Another one, this is a summary of a program through the National Endowment for the Humanities. If you read the first line, program supports individuals or faculty, staff members at Hispanic serving institutions. We are a Hispanic serving institution. So number one, nice match here. Couple of things I pick out here. It says awards are designed to be flexible. This is a program that specifically has a pretty wide, it's somewhat unique because it has a pretty wide objective or a pretty wide target. It's not, many programs are targeting very specific areas. This one is pretty wide as long as you're a humanities project and you're at a Hispanic serving institution, it may be applicable. It goes on and it talks about specifics. Eligible projects include research pursuing, and they list many things. Producing articles, monographs, books, digital materials, archaeological site reports, etc. So you can see that this one is actually pretty widely targeted. So it's not as narrowly targeted as some. So it might be as, this might be an appropriate program for many different types of people in the humanities. Another one, this is a Department of Education call, which gives a sense of the narrowness of some of these. So one of the things it says, the department has established 2 competitive priorities, and then it goes on to list those competitive priorities. Number 1, increase the number of Hispanic and other low-income students attaining degrees in these fields, and to develop transfer and articulation agreements, et cetera, et cetera. It says applicants must address both priorities to receive an additional 10 points. What they're referring to is on their rating scale. What this means is if you don't address both of these priorities, you're starting off with a 90 percentile, right? You cannot get an A. And so important things to keep in mind. This is what I mean. If you don't exactly match the program priorities, you're starting off at a deficit. Follow directions. Seems simple. It's an important thing. It's a large mistake that we see and that people make. So a couple of ways to do this. Obviously, you're going to read the call for proposals itself, the RFP. However, many agencies have supplementary information. For example, National Science Foundation has their grant proposal guides in which they give you all the details about writing a proposal that are not given in the RFP itself. The RFP may be 8 or 10 pages. Grant proposal guidelines is about 50 or 60 pages. So it's a lot of material to read. However, in many NSF RFPs, they often ignore the fact that NSF has a requirement that you explicitly address broader impacts and intellectual merit. That information is given in the grant proposal guidelines. So if you're not reading both of these, you're not getting full information. So you really have to read all of the information related to a proposal. Another thing you could do is review abstracts of past funded proposals. Most or nearly all of the agencies will put on their websites abstracts of previously funded proposals. It's a great way to get some information, get some more specific information about what that program is trying to fund, what they're looking for, right? They might talk about things in somewhat vague terms, but once you actually start to read abstracts, you get a sense of what people are proposing, what has been successful, what type of projects they're funding, these type of things. Another thing I'll mention here is while grant agencies usually only make abstracts available, if you find a specific abstract that's you think is especially relevant to what you're doing or related or somehow is similar, you should reach out to that PI and ask him or her if they would share a copy of their proposal with you. Funded proposals, not always, because there are some intellectual property issues, but generally fall into, what is it? The freedom, yeah, I forget the acronym. Well, I guess it's the Freedom of Information Act. So you can obtain these. It usually takes a lot longer if you have to obtain them through the Freedom of Information Act. Most PIs recognize this, so they'll send you one. Most PIs will not only, most PIs actually will prefer to send you one because they might want to remove the budget or some other information that they don't want to share, and so they could control that information a little bit better. But there is no harm in reaching out to a PI to ask him or her for the full proposal. Say that again?
Well, if you request it,
Uh-huh.
send it, and then, like you said, they remove the budget.
Right.
Can you also say, if you're removing any items, can you just use them?
You can. I see what you're asking.
If you drop the bottle,
Right.
using the budget, you might be under the false
Yeah.
assumption, false belief that you don't need that.
I think the biggest benefit of someone else's proposal is the actual text, to see how they're constructing the text, how they're building the story. So from my perspective, isn't the only thing you might want, but the most important thing is really the text of the proposal. You can certainly ask them that information. They may or may not share that information. But also, that's where number one comes into play, right? The RFP and any other information will give you explicitly what they require. Kathy?
Any Freedom of Information Act requests I've done in the past, for example, they redact what is private. So it'll say budget, but then it'll be like redacted.
Well, right. That information may not necessarily be private, but the PI may be more reluctant, and budgets often don't matter, but the PI may be reluctant to share the budget, who knows, right? So it's not necessarily private information they're redacting, but just information that, you're really looking. When I tend to send out proposals, I tend to just send out the text because it's my impression that that's what they're asking for. Volunteer for a program review committee. We've been saying this over and over. Many agencies have accept volunteers for program reviews. You submit a grant to an agency, they organize a review committee. That review committee will read your proposal, rank it, and give feedback to the program officer. You can volunteer for these committees. Some agencies require certain types of credentials and or require that you be funded through that agency to sit on their review committee, but many do not. And this is it's not a well-kept secret, but it's just not widely known. NSF often does not, most of their programs do not require that you have received funding from them to sit on that. It's a phenomenal way to get experience about what makes a good proposal. You can both see what other people are proposing. You are forced to read it in detail, often are paid to read it in detail because these agencies will give you a small stipend for the work you're doing. And even more significantly, what it does is it allows you to calibrate your judgment, right? You look at this proposal and you think, wow, that's phenomenal. And all of your other reviewers look at that proposal and say, this is terrible. It gives you a better sense of what other reviewers are looking for and really allows you to kind of calibrate what you're looking for. It also gives you a sense of what it's like being a peer reviewer. I remember early on, I had someone I was working with who had been a former NSF program officer, and he tried to tell me, this is what it's like. This was before online evaluations, and he said, you're sitting in a hotel room, you have 45 minutes to read each proposal, and it just didn't get through until being in that situation, realizing what it means to have an hour, or as review committees are now, usually you don't have to travel to the agency, but you've got competing demands, right? You've got classes to prepare for. You may have families, you have research to do. So how are you reviewing this in context of all those other demands? From the writer's side, you hope that the reviewer is completely absorbed in your proposal, but he or she may not be, and it gives you some perspective on that. Speak with a program director, and let me clarify that a little bit. Not all federal agencies, and I'm speaking a lot about federal grant proposals, and this came up last time I gave this. I'm not talking, I think some of this is relevant to private money and foundation proposals, but the way you pursue those is a little bit different. So I'm really talking about federal proposals. Many agencies, again, not all, the program officer is willing to speak to you. He or she will not say, that's a great idea. But he or she might say, you know, that's interesting, but maybe you should think about this, or, you know, that doesn't really seem well aligned, or it does seem reasonably well aligned. So he or she may be able to give you a sense of how to guide. Early on, we talked about how to tweak your objectives so that they better match the program. The program officer can give you that type of information. So it's not unreasonable to reach out to a program officer of a program you're applying for. I wouldn't call blind. First of all, do your homework. Make sure you have a good sense of what you're applying for, a good sense of what the program is, that you match it well, that you're relatively well into moving forward. And at that point, it might be appropriate to reach out. Personnel in my office are happy to chat with you as well. We have expertise in different areas, so I tend to be pretty vague when humanities scientists, when humanities projects come in, but so we all have experience in what a good grant proposal is, how to match objectives to a specific area, so we're happy to give you feedback as well. Absolutely not. No, I'm just kidding. You're CJ doctoral students. Yeah, we're happy to assist with those projects. We also, we hope that like your mentor will also be assisting as well, and he or she might be able to give you guidance as well. But yeah, those projects generally, correct me if I'm wrong? Right. But we could give you advice. The other thing I would encourage you to think about is begin well in advance. Susie would be able to tell us how many times she hears, you know, I've got a proposal that's due on Monday. What do you think about that? Right? Especially a less experienced PI having not enough time. Again, we'll talk about success rate a little bit later, but it just lowers your chances of getting this proposal. I would throw out at least several months in advance of a deadline. Is not too early to start working on this. As we start to flesh out what the different parts of a proposal are, you'll see why. The other thing, we are now requesting all PIs to let our office know at least 3 weeks in advance of not necessarily the deadline, but the date that you plan to submit. Hopefully that's not past the deadline. The date you plan to submit, so we know what type of resources. Is it a holiday? Is everyone in? Do we have the resources available for that project? So that's a good question. How much lead time do you have? So it varies. I think by law, federal agencies have to give a minimum of 30 days. Okay, so it has to, right. They have to give a minimum of 30 days. So you might not be able to give us 3 months. That said, many of these programs are repeat programs, right? The NSF Law and Social Science program is not a brand new program. It will not be a brand new program next year. The deadline for it consistently has been, I don't know what, but usually agencies try to keep deadlines consistent. Okay, so some Department of Ed programs I've been submitting to, invariably for the past 10 years, their deadline has been March or April. Once they strayed into May. So I know every year, right? So you might, a program may not be formally announced, yet you might already be thinking about applying to it, right? And hopefully we could help with getting you that type of information. But good question. So let's talk a little bit about identifying the issue, because it's the most important part. The problem you're proposing really makes the proposal, okay? Some things to think about. What reviewers are looking for. What makes a good problem that you want to pursue. An important need or issue, okay? Not obviously to you, but hopefully to people other than you as well. A gap between where we are now and where we could be, okay? So it may not be a problem, but it may be some missing information that we don't really, our field really needs to be here, but we're here. And so this project will get us to that point of understanding this issue. Some limitation on current knowledge or process. These are kind of vague guidelines because it's really hard to identify. It very much depends on field and issue, et cetera. But some general guidelines, what you want to do, you really need to be identifying a significant issue, because some of the things that drive success, when a reviewer looks at a proposal, some things they're looking for is significance. Some of these items we just talked about. Is the problem or is the research they're proposing significant? Is it going to address something significant? Is the result of this going to be something of value, right? Is it going to be is it going to be of narrow value to the researcher, maybe narrow value to the institution that the researcher is at, or of broad value to the field, the discipline, the national state of this or that area. Originality. Okay, another thing they look for is originality. That doesn't mean you're not building on work before you, but if you're repeating studies that someone else has done, or just slightly modifying studies that someone else has done, or tweaking an existing project, tends not to make the strongest type of proposal. Now, I should break in here, because there are programs, specifically in the education area, there are programs for implementation. So they're not necessarily for new research, but they're for implementation of existing proven ideas. In that case, you obviously don't need to have an original idea. What you may need is to be developing that program or that issue in an original way. So with an original audience, urban institution, minority serving institution, et cetera. So still there might be some aspect of originality, but depending on exactly what type of proposal, you may have to qualify that a little bit. Likelihood of success. A lot of connotations here. The research you propose, does it fulfill these first two things, and is it likely to succeed? And I think I have another bullet about this, are you likely to be successful in doing it? Okay? So often a big mistake I've noted, especially with first-time or more novice PIs, is they propose to move the moon to another planet, right? Something that they're proposing something way too big. Reviewers look at this. Is it likely to succeed? Is it a reasonable amount of work for this proposal? And can this person do it? So related to this one, knowledge or experience. Do you have the knowledge? Do you have the experience? And are you conveying that? Not only to do proposals often require curriculum vitae, usually in some edited form. But it may be, some programs require this, and even if they don't, it's probably a good idea to talk a little bit about why you are the person to do this type of research. So to highlight point, it doesn't have to be 4 pages. It could be a paragraph. But in particular, I have X, Y, and Z experience, as mentioned on my vitae, which really makes me applicable to this. Or if you feel you're a little novice in a field, can you work with someone that brings some experience that will assist in the success? There's often a tendency for newer or younger PIs to bring on a more senior person just because they're well known. I would say not necessarily an important part, unless that person is significantly contributing, either physically or intellectually, and that person is really relevant to what you're writing about, right? In that case, it is then something to do. Well written, okay? So you not only have to produce something original, significant, likely to succeed, but you have to write it well. This is an enormously important and perhaps underlooked part of it, and we'll talk about this more and more, but it's human beings reading your proposal. If it's poorly written, spelling errors, grammatical errors, they turn people off, right? You all have read student material or colleagues' material. If there's spelling errors, you're like, yeah, you question the quality just because of those type of errors. You could be proposing the most brilliant project in the world, poorly written with a lot of mistakes, is going to set you many notches below where you need to be to get success. Other things, as I said before, is it a realistic amount of work? Are you proposing too much or too little? Is there sufficient detail for the reviewers to understand what you're doing? Are you talking about this project in really vague terms and you're not really telling them exactly what you're going to do? Is it cost effective? There are other factors that I'd say are smaller here, but all of these things weigh into whether a proposal is successful or not. Let's talk about some other parts of writing. This is a little graphic that I stole from someone who has done talks like this before and said, please feel free to steal my graphics, so I'm not really stealing it. So it's an interesting point. We're used to, over here on the left, academic writing. As academics, we're more prone to do this type of stuff. We write stuff that is centered around it, that is research-centered and is past-oriented. This is what I did, this is how I did it, these were the results, right? That's different than a grant proposal because you have to propose something that's future-oriented. It's very difficult to do. I know that what I've often found is sometimes it's helpful for me to start a project before I successfully propose it. I have an idea, I kind of know what it is, but actually getting started helps me figure out, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to do, but that's not going to work. But this other thing will work. So that doesn't mean you have to do the project, but getting a little bit of a start often helps because you have to talk about what you want to do. Paper writing, often you're explaining to the reader, whereas in a proposal, you're really trying to sell the reader. That doesn't mean turn this into a used car sales pitch. But it does mean you have to be passionate about what you're talking about, and you really have to make the reader believe that you can do what you're going to do. Often, not always, but maybe especially in science, we tend to write impersonally in research. We also, not always, but often talk about it's more individual. In a grant proposal, you really have to, it's less impersonal, you really have to convey active voice. There were some slides that I didn't steal from him, but I thought were really interesting in that this person was talking about passive and active voice. Often in a manuscript, we don't always, but we often talk in passive voice. It was found that blah, 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 blah. Whereas in a proposal, active voice is important in manuscripts, but in a proposal, active voice is even more important. They don't want to know that some abstract venue or person might find it. They want to know that you are going to find it, or you are going to, or if not you, your colleague who is also on your proposal, right? So it's important to be active. A couple of these things may not be as applicable, but one of the other things is often on grant proposals there are strict limits. There are reasons there are strict limits on length, okay? If you have a 30-page limit and you're like, I don't know how I could propose my project in 30 pages, probably you're not writing the proposal, right? Because the grant agency is, if you're writing it, I understand that we're all passionate about our work and we want to write a lot about it, but you have to keep these things in mind. Some other things to help you focus on the writing. Have a really clear vision of what you want to do. Again, it often helps to get started on that work. I've found that I've been in a number of situations where I have an idea, I propose the idea, it doesn't get funded, I actually start to work on the idea, I repropose it, it gets funded. So, in fact, I'll make a plug for one of the OER funding programs. OER has a seed money program which provides a very small amount of money, but it's a little bit of money to help to do exactly this, help you get started. If you need to collect a little bit of data, if you need to go to a community and interview some subjects, if you need to do something, it actually helps you get started so you're in a stronger position to write the proposal.